Imagine a place where every piece of land, every stone, and every wall carries centuries of faith, pain, and broken promises. A small territory smaller than the state of Alabama, yet concentrating some of the greatest tensions in modern history. A place where a simple border can decide the fate of millions of people. This is the setting of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, a conflict that, despite having begun over 100 years ago, still seems far from over. And the question many people ask is, why do they keep fighting? What makes this piece of land so disputed? Before answering, it's important to understand that this story doesn't begin with a war, but with an idea. An idea born in the heart of Europe at the end of the 19th century. At that time, Jews lived scattered across various countries, suffering discrimination, persecution, and violence. Anti-Semitism was growing. Pogroms swept through entire cities in Eastern Europe. And the question many Jews asked themselves was simple and painful. Will we ever have a safe home? It was in this context that Zionism was born, a movement that defended the Jewish people's right to have their own state. For them, this home should be built in the promised land of the Bible, the ancient region of Israel, then known as Palestine. But there was one detail. Palestine wasn't empty. At that time, the territory was part of the Ottoman Empire and was inhabited mostly by Muslim and Christian Arabs. Yes, there were small Jewish communities, but the population was mostly Arab. Still, the Zionist dream began to gain strength. And when the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I, the European powers, especially the United Kingdom, saw Palestine as a strategic piece on the Middle Eastern chessboard. In 1917, the British issued a document that would change everything: the Balfour Declaration. In it, the UK government stated its support for the creation of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. It was the first time a world power had officially committed to the Zionist ideal. But the text contained a detail that would be ignored in the following decades: the commitment not to prejudice the civil and religious rights of the non-Jewish communities already living there. From then on, waves of Jewish immigration began. Thousands of European Jews started settling in the region. Coexistence between the new settlers and local Arabs soon became tense. Each new settlement, each land purchase, each political act inflamed tempers. And the world watched, powerless, as a division began that would only grow. Then came World War II, and with it the absolute horror of the Holocaust. 6 million Jews murdered in extermination camps. Entire families disappeared. The trauma was so deep that the world, for the first time, recognized the urgent need for a safe home for the Jewish people. And Palestine was once again at the center of the question. In 1947, the UN proposed a solution: divide the territory into 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab, while Jerusalem would have an international regime, administered by the UN itself. It was an attempt to reconcile the two peoples. Jewish leaders accepted the plan. The Arabs did not. For them, it was unacceptable to hand over half the land they considered theirs to a newly arrived group backed by foreign powers. And then, on May 14, 1948, Jewish leader David Ben-Gurion announced the creation of the State of Israel. The next day, the armies of 5 Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded the new state. The first Arab-Israeli war had begun. But, against all expectations, Israel won. And not only survived, it expanded its borders. The victory was celebrated as a miracle by the Jews, but for the Palestinians it was a tragedy. More than 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes. Entire villages disappeared. This exodus became known as the Nakba, the catastrophe. To this day, millions of descendants of these refugees live scattered in camps in the West Bank, Gaza, Lebanon, and Jordan, without a state they can call their own. From then on, the conflict became an open wound. Palestine was divided between 2 Arab countries. Jordan took the West Bank and Egypt took Gaza. Jerusalem, a sacred city for Jews, Muslims, and Christians, was also divided in half. During the 1950s and 1960s, new wars erupted. In 1967, Israel fought the famous Six-Day War. In less than a week, it defeated the Arab armies and occupied new territories: the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Egyptian Sinai, and the Syrian Golan Heights. For the first time, Israel controlled all of Jerusalem. And with this, a new reality was born, that of a country that, in the name of security, began to occupy lands that belonged to another people. And this is where the story changes tone. From the 1970s onward, the conflict ceased to be between states and became between peoples. On one side, the Israelis, who saw the occupations as a way to guarantee their survival. On the other, the Palestinians, who saw their homes, their farms, and their cities being taken little by little. In the midst of this struggle, Palestinian resistance movements emerged, some political, others armed. And the first Israeli settlements also began to appear in the occupied lands. Small Jewish colonies that, over time, transformed into entire cities, connected by exclusive roads and protected by military forces. Today, these settlements are at the center of tensions in the West Bank and are considered illegal by the UN. But the war wasn't just made of weapons. It was also made of fear, ideology, and religion. Jerusalem became the ultimate symbol of this dispute. For Jews, it's the city where Solomon's temple stood, the spiritual heart of Israel. For Muslims, it's where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. And for Christians, it's the place where Jesus was crucified and resurrected. A single territory that, for three religions, is the center of the world. And this mixture of faith, politics, and bloodshed made the conflict practically unsolvable. Peace attempts came and went. The most important happened in 1978, with the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. For the first time, an Arab country officially recognized Israel. Egypt recovered the Sinai but renounced the Gaza Strip. It was a historic step, but one that isolated the Palestinians even more. In the 1990s, the world had hope again. The Oslo Accords, signed in 1993, provided for mutual recognition between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization. It was the beginning of a promise: two peoples, two states, living side by side in peace. But this promise quickly fell apart. The assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 by a Jewish extremist opposed to the agreement, and the continuous advance of settlements in the West Bank undermined trust on both sides. The 21st century began with more violence. In 2000, the Second Intifada, a Palestinian popular uprising, erupted after an Israeli politician just visit to the Temple Mount, one of Jerusalem's most sensitive sites. The conflict took to the streets. Suicide bombings, bombardments, military incursions. The hope for peace disappeared again. Today, more than 75 years after the creation of Israel, the situation remains delicate. The Gaza Strip is controlled by Hamas, an Islamic group that doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. The West Bank lives under military occupation and surrounded by walls and checkpoints. Millions of Palestinians live without full citizenship, with movement restrictions and under constant tension. On the other side, Israelis live under the threat of rockets and attacks, trapped in the fear that violence could erupt again at any moment. And perhaps the most tragic part of this story is that, for each generation born, there also grows the memory that the enemy is on the other side of the wall. Palestinian children learn they've lost their land. Israeli children grow up hearing that the whole world wants to see them destroyed. And this cycle of fear and distrust is what keeps the war alive, even when there are no gunshots. But why does this conflict never end? Because it's not just about politics. It's a dispute over identity, belonging, survival. A clash between memories and promises. On one side, a people carrying the trauma of centuries of persecution and the right to exist. On the other, a people who lost their land, their homes, and fight to be recognized as a nation. And as long as neither gives up their narrative, peace will remain just a distant idea. Some say that the greatest enemy of Israel and Palestine isn't each other, but the past. A past that insists on repeating itself, generation after generation. History shows that whenever dialogue seems possible, fear and revenge return to dominate. And perhaps the real challenge isn't deciding who's right, but who will have the courage to rewrite the ending of this story. Because, in the end, the conflict between Israel and Palestine isn't just about borders. It's about what it means to have a home. About how two nations can claim the same soil and call the same sky sacred, and that's why this is a story that continues. A story that forces us to look at the past and ask, has the world learned anything from it? If you made it this far, tell me in the comments. Do you believe there's still a possible path to peace between Israelis and Palestinians? Or is this really the conflict that will never end? If this video helped you understand a little better the origins of this war and why it's still alive today, leave your like. It really helps the channel reach more people. And if you want to continue this journey with me, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, where we'll dive even deeper into the stories that shape the world we live in. Because understanding the past is the first step to not repeating it.